All right, so I'm going to explain to you how to set up custom API calls, and I'm also going to help you understand the fundamentals of how they work. So this isn't a video where you just blindly follow the instructions. I really want to help you to understand the underlying setup, so that once you want to set up your own API call, you don't need to follow instructions. So first of all, what even is an API call, and when do we want to use custom API calls? So very simply put, an API call allows us to send or request data from one platform to another. So for an example, if we want to send data from N8N to our CRM, we would use API calls as a bridge to do that. Pretty much every platform and tool out there has APIs available. So this is especially useful when you're building AI automations because you can integrate and connect different tools together. And most tools already have built-in integrations. For an example, in N8N, there are a bunch of different nodes and modules for basically any service you can imagine. But there might be certain cases where a platform doesn't have a node available or doesn't support a specific action that you need to accomplish. So in these cases, you'll need to use a custom API. And some people prefer to use custom APIs every time, even if there are integrations available, because they do give you more control and flexibility. All right, so now that you understand what APIs are and how they work and when to use them, I'm gonna walk you through how to actually set a custom API call up. First, I'm gonna explain to you how they work. I'm gonna explain to you what each section within an API call actually means. I'm gonna be demonstrating this in N8N, but the setup is pretty much the same across all tools and platforms. So the first thing that we need to do is set up an HTTP request. So if we go into N8N here, we can add a node and type in HTTP request. An HTTP request is simply the message that we send from one platform to another. So everything that the API needs is contained within this. It includes the data that we're sending, who we are, and the type of request that we want to send. So I'm going to explain to you what each one of these sections in the HTTP request actually means so you understand what you're filling out. So the first section we have here is the method, and this is where we're going to define what we want the API call to actually do. So you can see there's a bunch of different options here, but the main ones we'll typically use are the get and the post request. And these do exactly what they sound like. The get request is going to receive data from the platform. Post request is going to post or send data to another platform. The next section we have here is the URL. This is where we're going to enter our API endpoint URL. And what an endpoint essentially is that it's a representation of a specific action or set of actions within that platform. So we don't just want to put the website URL here. We need to put a very specific URL here based on the type of request that we're making. And in a minute, I'll show you how to find these and how they work. The next section is the authentication. The authentication tells a platform who we are and what account we want to connect to. We can store our credentials so we don't have to manually input them every time. But most of the time, you're just going to handle the authentication through headers, which I'll show you in a minute. Next, we have query parameters. The query parameters are mostly used when we're receiving data. This section is going to allow us to filter and control how the data is returned to us. And again, I'll show you an example of that in a minute. Next, we have the headers. And the headers are going to provide the API call additional context for our request. So the headers are commonly used as a way to authenticate ourselves and to include our API key. And in some cases, we're going to use it to tell the API how we want our data to be interpreted. And finally, we have the body section. So whenever we're doing a post call or we're sending data to another platform, we're going to want to use this body section. And this is where we're going to fill out all the values for the data we want to send. So typically this is going to be used when you're creating or updating information on another platform. So now that you understand what each one of these sections means, I'm going to run you through an example of us setting up two different types of custom API calls. And in this first demonstration, I'm going to show you a GET request where we're going to receive information from another platform using a custom API. All right, so in this specific example, we're going to be using a weather API, and we're going to use a custom API call to receive weather information from a specified location. So the specific API we're using is openweathermap.com. So the first thing that you're always going to want to do when you're setting up an API call is you need to generate an API key. An API key is a way that we authenticate ourselves to the platform. So you can think of it as being similar to a password where we use it to connect requests to our specific account. And the process for doing this is going to be different for every platform. So just do your research. Of course, there's always going to be documentation that's going to walk you through it. And you could always ask ChatGPT or AI. I find that to be very helpful. So for the Open Weather API, I would just go here to my profile and I go to my API keys. And if we want to create an API key, we're just going to go here and put in the name. So we're going to put N8N test, and then we're going to generate. That's going to generate a brand new API key for us. So one really important thing to remember is that you never want to share your API keys publicly, because anyone with access to this API key can very easily make a request under your account. Some platforms charge you per API call, so you can end up with a really high bill for requests that you didn't even make. Okay, so now that we've generated the API key, we're gonna wanna go to the documentation here, and this is gonna show us everything we need to fill out to get the weather. So here you can see that we have the URL endpoint for this specific call, and it also lists all the parameters. So this call is actually very simple. All we have to do is fill in the blanks. So you can see we have blanks for latitude, longitude, and the API key. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna copy this URL endpoint, and we're gonna go back into endpoint. So for method, we're gonna wanna select get, since we're getting information from the API. So we're just gonna copy this link and we're going to paste it into endpoint. All right, now we're going to fill out the blanks for the latitude and longitude. I don't know if this is an actual location, but this is just for the sake of example. I'm gonna put in some random digits here. And then where it says API key, we're going to paste our API key. Now we should have everything we need to run the call. So we're gonna go ahead and execute the step. And now that we've executed the step, you can see we have all the information. We have the temperature, feels like, pressure, and humidity. So I wanna show you a case where we can actually use the query parameters to change the way that the data is sent back to us. So if we go back to the documentation page, we can see a list of parameters here. And one of the parameters is units. So we can actually use this as a way to change the unit of measurement. So for an example, if we want to see the temperature in the metric system in Celsius, we can change it to the metric system. What we do is we literally just copy the parameter from here. You go back to endpoint, and we're going to select send query parameters. And for the name, we're going to put in units. And for the value, we're going to put metric. And this is going to send us back all these values from the metric system. Now you can see it's at 4 degrees Celsius. And alternatively, we can use the imperial system if we want to see Fahrenheit. And now that we've executed that, it's in 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So again, the query parameters are going to differ and vary based on the specific platform that you're using. So this isn't going to work for every API. So it's important that you refer to your specific documentation. All right, so next I'm going to show you an example of setting up a post call. And a post call would be used when we want to send data from one platform to another. The setup is a bit more complex here, but now that you understand the fundamentals, all you really need to do is refer to the documentation for your specific platform and you should be able to set it up. So in this example, we're going to make a post call to Slack where we're going to send a message to our Slack channel from endpoint. So I'm not going to actually show you how to set up the Slack tokens and the API, but I'm going to show you how we are going to fill out the HTTP request so you get an idea of what a post request looks like. And what we're trying to accomplish here is that we want to use endpoint to send a message to our Slack channel. So you can see here we have this test channel and I want to send a message for everyone to see. So we're going to go to our HTTP request, and for our method, we are going to select post because we're posting information through the API. We're sending out information. And now we're going to put in the URL endpoint. And if we go to the documentation for Slack, we can see the documentation for the chat post message method. So you can see here we have post and then we have the link. So we're just going to copy and paste this in here. And now we have the URL endpoint. We're just going to leave the authentication blank because we're going to fill out the API key through the headers. And we're not going to put anything in the query parameters because we're not receiving information, we're sending out information. Now in the headers, we're going to put our API key. And per the Slack documentation, what we're going to want to put for the name is authorization. And for the value, we're going to type in bearer, and then we're going to paste in our API key here. Now for our next header, you don't have to do this every time, but it is good practice to tell the API the format of the data that we're sending. So what we do here is type in content-type. And for the value, we're going to type application/JSON. And this is going to tell the API that the information we're sending through the body is in the JSON format. And simply put, JSON is just the way that we format the data and send it out through the API. All right, so now we're going to select send body, and this is where we're going to fill out the data that we want to send to Slack. So you can see here that this is being sent through the JSON format, and we're going to fill out the parameters. So if we refer to the documentation here, we can see that one of the parameters is channel. As you can see here, this is where we're going to determine what channel in Slack we want to send it to. So we're just going to type in channel, and then I'm going to go to my Slack, and I'm going to go to the channel details, and I'm going to copy the channel ID here, and I'm going to paste it into the values. And since we want to send a message, the specific value name is text, And then on the value, we're just going to type in our message. So we're going to type in hello everyone. And now we should be set up, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to execute this step. And you can see it's successful, and we can tell because we have the green check mark here and we can see all of the data that was returned. If I go to my Slack, you can now see the message was sent here. Hello, everyone. So yeah, those are a few examples of setting up custom API calls. And once you understand the structure behind all these work, it's just a matter of figuring out how the API calls are set up for your specific platform, referring to the documentation, and simply just following the instructions. So it does take a bit of research and a bit of problem solving. And this can definitely be something that's very time consuming. So if you are looking to outsource this or you need someone to do this for you, this is something that I provide as a service. So feel free to DM me or send me a message or a comment, and I'd be happy to help you out. So yeah, I hope that this was informative, and I hope now that you understand the basics of how API calls work.